raids, for example. Strikes were banned, court injunctions were issued, breaking strikes and arresting strike leaders. And there were no legal recognitions of unions or of working people, or even the right to dissent. The First Amendment hadn't really been tested even at that point. So by the time the economy collapses yet again in 1929, there's no legal infrastructure for allowing self-organization of people, allowing dissent to happen. And so one thing that comes out of that period is a legalization of unions with the Wagner Act, and as you've been talking about, the Social Security Act and unemployment and so forth. And now that's being dismantled, little by little, death by 1,000 cuts. Do you think we're heading back to the same kind of situation where all of those pieces of that social peace deal, now that they're being attacked and dismantled, Social Security being attacked by cutting the payroll contributions, they call it a tax, it's not really a tax, the bans on collective bargaining and so forth. Do you think we're heading back to the situation where the mechanisms for peaceful change are being suppressed?
Absolutely. I think that's what I meant before. The business community, having gotten its way for the last 25 years, has kind of convinced itself that there really is no limit. They can keep going and they keep going. I'll give you an example. Over the last 12 months, basically over the year 2011, the real wage of the American working class has dropped by 2%. Every economist, left, right, and center, will tell you that one of the basic problems of the American economy is there's not enough purchasing power to buy goods and services to keep people working. The thing you do in that circumstance is to give the mass of people greater purchasing power. We just spent the last year depriving our working class, so it has 2% less to spend, and that's craziness, but it's a sign that the business community wants to use unemployment as a chance to lower wages, and there's no counterforce. The unions are neither capable nor willing to mount a movement against it, and the irony is, and this is something that the critics of capitalism have often said, the irony is that the capitalist system has its own momentum where it becomes self-destructive. It pushes so far and doesn't understand its own limits. You know, it's an old criticism of capitalism that if capitalists are successful in pressing down the wages of their workers to get more profits, they're forgetting that in order to get profits, you not only have to get a lot of work out of your worker, but you have to be able to sell what that worker produces for you. And that means you got to sell a lot of that back to those workers. But if you cut their wages, they can't buy it. So what you gain in your profits by lowering wages, you lose by not having enough customers. You have to work that out somehow. They're not in a mood to work anything out.
In order to work that out, there has to be some sort of organized institution that can present grievances, right? And now that we're seeing
can force higher wages.
And enforce it, exactly. But now that we're seeing a kind of interconnection of national security and the war on terrorism with the way to respond with overwhelming militarized responses to the Occupy movement, for example, lacking, of course, for the Tea Party movement, and the unions being much too closely aligned as an auxiliary of the Democratic Party and not willing to challenge the kind of austerity and privatization movements of the Democrats. In some ways, aren't we opening it up for increasing escalation of conflict in order to be heard? Do you see down the road a 1960s perhaps emerging, or 1930s when workers were taking over factories and farmers were burning their crops, or in the 60s when the black community and Puerto Rican community were arming themselves?
Yeah, I think that'll be part of the scenario. I think we will also see the building up of new organizations to replace the absent organizations that are not there. When you push people as much as we're pushing them, in a sense, that's what Occupy is. It's the first beginnings of an organized way of voicing these grievances, saying that the system isn't working, beginning to explore real alternatives, beginning to push for them. So I think we'll have all of these different things. I think much is in the hands of the authorities. If they respond the way they did to Occupy, by doing nothing for 2 months and then deciding that the solution is basically to commit violence against these groups. And that's really what we had. there was no violence committed by the people in Zuccotti Park in New York City. The violence begins when the mayor of New York orders bulldozers and police to go in and arrest people and destroy the little public library they had set up.
Their own property.
Yeah, destroy what these people had brought there. This is an admission of failure. You got no plan, you got no program, you don't respond to the issues these people have raised, you repress them. And, you know, in the short run, there's no occupation in Zuccotti Park at night. By the way, it's there during the daytime. But you've taught everybody a lesson that this is what you can expect from the government, and that lesson is going to be learned. The presumption of the repressors, that repression is the solution. We as a nation celebrate that doesn't work in Egypt, it doesn't work in Tunisia, it doesn't work in Bahrain, it doesn't work now in Syria, and we congratulate those people. The same leaders have nothing to say about that in the United States. They watch repression and they say nothing. No one